Hello everyone, I hope you're ready for more Hobbitness. Let's get started. Inside the hall it was now quite dark. Bjorn clapped his hands and trotted in 4 beautiful white ponies and several large-bodied gray dogs. Bjorn said something to them in a queer language, like animal noises turned into talk. They went out again and soon came back, carrying torches in their mouths, which they lit at the fire and stuck in low brackets on the pillar in the hall about the central hearth. The dogs could stand on their hind legs when they wished, and carried things with their forefeet. Quickly they got out boards and trestles from the side walls and set them up near the fire. Then ba, ba, ba was heard, and in came some snow-white sheep, led by a large coal-black ram. One bore a white cloth embroidered at the edges with figurines of animals. Others bore on their broad backs trays with bowls, and platters, and knives, and wooden spoons, which the dogs took quickly and laid on the trestle tables. They were very low, low enough even for Bilbo to sit at comfortably. Beside them a pony pushed 2 low-seated benches with wide rush bottoms and little short thick legs for Gandalf and Thorin, while at the far end he put Bjorn's big black chair of the same sort, in which he sat with his great legs stuck far out under the table. They were all at the chairs he had in his hall, and he probably had them low like the tables for the convenience of all the wonderful animals that waited on them. What did the rest sit on? They were not forgotten. The other ponies came in rolling round drum-shaped sections of logs, smooth and polished, and low enough even for Bilbo. Soon they were all seated at Bjorn's table, and the hall had not seen such a gathering for many a year. When they had supper, or a dinner such as they had not seen since they left the last homely house in the west and said goodbye to Elrond. The light of the torches and the fire flickered about them, and on the table were 2 tall red beeswax candles. All the time they ate, Bjorn, in his deep, rolling voice, told tales of the wild lands on his side of the mountains, and especially of the dark and dangerous woods that lay outstretched far to the north and south, a day's ride before them, barring their way to the east, the terrible forest of Mirkwood. The dwarves listened and shook their beards, for they knew that they must soon venture into that forest after they passed the mountain. It was the worst of perils they had to pass before they came to the dragon's stronghold. When the dinner was over, they began to tell tales of their own, but Bjorn seemed to be growing drowsy and paid little heed to them. They spoke most of gold and silver and jewels and making of things by smithcraft, and Bjorn did not appear to care for such things. There were no things of gold or silver in his halls, save for a few knives that were made of metal at all. They sat long at the table, and their wood drinking bowls were filled with mead. The dark night came on outside. The fires in the middle of the hall were built with fresh logs, and the torches were put out, and they sat in a light of dancing flames, with the pillars of the house standing tall behind them, the dark at the top of like the trees of the forest. Whether it was by magic or not, it seemed to Bilbo that he heard a sound like the wind in the branches stirring in the rafters, and hoots of owls. Soon he began to nod with sleep, and the voices seemed to grow very far away, until he woke with a start. The great door had creaked and slammed. Bjorn was gone. The dwarves were sitting cross-legged on the floor around the fire, and presently began to sing. Some of the verses were like this, but there were many more, and their singing went on for a while. The wind was on the withered heath, but in the forest stirred no leaf. Their shadows lay by night and day. The dark things silent crept beneath. The wind came down from mountains cold, and like a tide it roared and rolled. The branches groaned, the forest moaned, the leaves were laid upon the mold. The wind went on from west to east, all movement in the forest ceased, but shrill and harsh across the marsh its whistling voices were released. The grasses hiss, their tassels bent, the reeds were rattling on it wind. A shaken pool under heavens cool, where racing clouds were torn and rent. It passed the lonely mountain bare, and swept above the dragon's lair. There black and dark lay boulders stark, and flying smoke was in the air. It left the world and took its flight o'er the wide seas of the night. The moon set sail upon the gale, and stars were fanned to leaping light. Bilbo began to nod again. Suddenly up stood Gandalf. "It is time for sleep," he said. "For us, but not, I think, for Beorn. In this hall we can rest sound and safe, but I warn you all not to forget what Beorn said before he left us. You must not stray outside until the sun is up, on your peril." Bilbo found that the beds had already been laid at the side of the hall, on a sort of raised platform between the pillars in the outer hall. For him it was a little mattress of straw and woolen blankets. He snuggled into them very gladly, summertime though it was. The fire burned low, and he fell asleep. Yet in the night he woke. The fire had now sunk to a few embers. The dwarves and Gandalf were all asleep, to judge by their breathing. A splash of white on the floor came from the high moon, which was peering through the smoke hole in the roof. There was a growling sound outside, and a noise as of some great animal scuffling at the door. Bilbo wondered what it was, whether it could be Beorn in enchanted shape, and if he would come in as a bear and kill them. He dived under the blankets and hid his head, and fell asleep again in spite of his fears. It was full morning when he awoke. One of the dwarves had fallen over him in the shadows where he lay, and had rolled down with a bump on the platform and onto the floor. It was Beaufort, and he was grumbling about it when Bilbo opened his eyes. "Get up, lazy bones," he said, "or there will be no breakfast left for you." Up jumped Bilbo. "Breakfast!" he cried. "Where is breakfast?" "Mostly inside us," answered the other dwarves, who were moving about the hall. "But what is left is out of the veranda. We have been looking for Beorn ever since the sun got up, but there is no sign of him anywhere, though we all found breakfast laid as soon as we went out." "Where is Gandalf?" said Bilbo, moving off to find something to eat as quick as he could. "Oh, about here somewhere," they told him, but there was no sign of the wizard at all until late evening. Just before sunset he walked into the hall, where the Hobbit and the dwarves were having supper, waited on by Beorn's wonderful animals, as they had all day. Of Beorn he had seen nothing since the night before, and they were getting puzzled. "Where is our host, and where have you been all day yourself?" they all cried. "One question at a time, and none till after supper. I haven't had a bite since breakfast." At last Gandalf pushed away his plate and jug. He had eaten 2 whole loaves with masses of butter and honey and clotted cream, and drunk at least a quart of mead, and he took out his pipe. "I will answer the second question first," he said, "and bless me, this is a splendid place for smoke rings." Indeed, for a long time they could get nothing more out of him. He was so busy sending up smoke rings, dodging around the pillars of the hall, changing them in all sorts of different shapes and colors, and setting them at last chasing once against others. They must have looked very queer from the outside, popping out in the air one after another, green, blue, red, silvery gray, yellow, white, big ones, little tiny ones, dodging through the big ones, and joining into the figure eights and going off like a flock of birds into the distance. "I've been picking out bear tracks," he said at last. "There must have been a regular bears' meeting outside here last night. Soon I saw that Bjorn could not have made them all. There were far too many of them, and they were of various sizes too. I should say there were little bears, large bears, ordinary bears, and gigantic big bears, all dancing around outside in the dark till nearly dawn. They came from almost every direction except from the west over the river, from the mountains. In that direction only one set of footprints led, none coming, only going away from here. I followed them as far as the Kerach. There they disappeared into the river, but the water was too deep and far strong beyond the rocks for me to cross. It is easy enough, as you remember, to get from this bank to the Kerach by the ford, but on the other side of the cliff, standing up from the swirling channel, I had to walk for miles until I found a place where the river was wide enough for me to wade and swim, then miles back to pick up the tracks again. By that time it was too late for me to follow them far. They went straight off in the directions where the pine woods on the east side of the Misty Mountains, where we had our pleasant little party with the wargs the night before last. And now I think I have answered your first question too," ended Gandalf, and then he sat for a long while. Bilbo thought about what he knew what the wizard meant. "What shall we do?" he said. "If he leads all the wargs and the goblins down here, we should be caught and killed. I thought you said he was not a friend of yours."
"So did I, and don't be silly. You had better go to bed. Your wits are sleepy."
The hobbit felt quite crushed, and there seemed nothing else to do but to get into bed. While the dwarves were still singing songs, he dropped asleep, still puzzling his little head about Bjorn, till he dreamed a dream of hundreds of black bears dancing slowly around and around in the moonlight in the courtyard. Then he woke up, and everyone else was asleep, and he heard the same scraping, scruffling, snuffling, and growling as before. Next morning they were all wakened by Bjorn himself.
So you are here still," he said. He picked up the hobbit and laughed. "Not eaten by wargs or goblins or wicked bears, I see," and poked little Mr. Baggin's waistcoat most disrespectfully. "Little Bunny is getting nice and fat on bread and honey," he chuckled. "Come and have some more."
That's where we'll end for today. We'll find out more about Bjorn's tale next time. Thank you to all my Patreon supporters, and to thank to all of you. I will talk to you soon.